Good afternoon, everybody. I'm so excited to be moderating this session of the 2021 NGC Bocas Lit Fest, Love is War. When Nicholas asked me to do this, I jumped at the opportunity because I know we're in for a treat with two fabulous writers, two phenomenal women. And I'm just so happy you're able to join us. So first off, let me apologize for our delayed start. We had some technical glitches, but it's all sorted now, and we're so glad that you're here. So with me today are Cherie Jones and Lisa Allen Agostini. So in her new novel, The Bread the Devil Need, and Cherie's novel, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, love and violence are constant companions. And in this hour, we're going to get some insight, have a one-on-one chat with each of these fabulous writers. If you're a writer, be prepared to get some tips, some strategies, some inspiration. If you're a reader, come and hear about these two books that you must buy, you must have on your shelf. These are two writers that you must follow. If you've read the book already, you're going to get greater insight into both books. If you are a journalist, you're in for an interesting conversation with two leading voices in Caribbean fiction. And so, without any further ado, I'm going to kick us off. So, first off, in terms of order, I'm going to read a brief bio of each of the women. I'm sure by now everyone in the Caribbean must know them, but I'm going to give you a little bit of intro in case you don't. Then you're going to hear from each of them giving a quick summary of the book. I'll ask some questions, you'll be treated with readings, and then finally we'll have some audience questions. So the hardworking Vocus team is monitoring all platforms. So just drop your questions in all the chats and we'll get going. So Cherie and Lisa, welcome. So I will now have Cherie's bio. So Cherie Jones is an award-winning author from Barbados. Her debut novel, How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, has been critically acclaimed by several publications, including the New York Times, LA Times, Washington Post, and was Good Morning America's book club pick for February 2021. Recently, it was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction, which is a very prestigious UK award. She has a host of literary credits and awards. She's a master at her craft. Equally, Lisa Allen Agostini is a writer and editor from Trinidad and Tobago. Again, very, very well awarded. She's a noted journalist as well, having written for all the major newspapers in Trinidad. And her books include The Bread the Devil Need, Home Home, and which was a finalist for the Coldbirth Award for Caribbean Literature, and the Chalice Project. She also has a collection of poems, Swallowing the Sky. So I want to make the most of the hour, so I'm cutting the bios and getting right into it. I must say that there are trigger warnings here. Both books are violent, tender, troubling, gripping, and raise some very important questions. These are books that you're going to feel deeply. You may just plunge all into it and read it in one sitting, or you may have to pause to catch yourself emotionally. But either way, you'll never forget about these books and their characters. So I'm going to turn over to each writer to tell us in 2 minutes what her book is about. And we're mindful of spoiler alerts, but we'll go over to you first, Cherie. Tell us how the one-armed sister sweeps her house is all about.
How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is a book about a hair braider who works on the beach in Barbados called Lala. She's married to a man by the name of Aiden, who is a violent criminal. And we meet Lala in mid-1980s on the night that their first child is born. And on this same night, there is a murder in one of the luxurious villas on the beach. And How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is really about how the two events are connected. And it explores race, class, love, and a host of over the course of the novel. So in summary, that's what it's about.
Okay, thanks, Cherie. Lisa, tell us about how The Bread the Devil Need.
Okay, The Bread the Devil Need is it's shortish. And it is about a 40-year-old mixed race Trinidadian woman who is, she's a shop girl. She works as a sales clerk in a shop while she's a supervisor in town. And there's this contrast between the life she lives in public and the kata she just get when she's home, because her boyfriend, soon to be fiance, beats her and other things. And so it traces how she got into this relationship. What are the sort of social forces around the relationship, but also how she is delivered from the relationship. And I use the word delivered in a deliberate way because there is God in the book. So it's very much a story of redemption.
Love it, love it, love it. And I can tell everybody here read the books. You need to buy the books. If you already bought a copy, buy 10 more and give to your friends and family, right?
Mine is actually out next month, so they can't buy it yet. They can pre-order.
Oh, so I was in the privileged few that got the early release. So I got the early release. So make sure that you pre-order, definitely get Lisa's book and Cherie's book as well. I think now would be a great time to start with some readings to tantalize our listeners. So I'm going to start with Cherie first for her first reading, and then immediately after that, Lisa, I'd like you to do your first reading. Right?
Okay, so I'm going to read an extract from the beginning of the book, the prologue. And the book, there is a myth in the book, the myth of the one-armed sister, and that's linked to the title. So I'm going to read a little bit about that myth. Okay. I didn't tell you that young girls like you must stay indoors, Wilma chides mildly. I didn't tell you about the things that live in the Baxter's tunnels. You walking about to find out about them yourself. When Lala doesn't answer, she says, let me tell you about a little girl like you that didn't listen to her mother. Wilma tells the story of the one-armed sister. The village priest and his wife had 2 little girls, such beautiful children you never did see. Skin yellow and pretty like peanut milk, hair curly and silky, eyes big and light brown with long, long lashes. But although they're both beautiful, only one of them was gifted with good sense. The other one was own way and liked to give the mother mouth. So it just so happened that it had an entrance to the Baxters on the lawn at the bottom of the garden. Nobody's sure what it's doing there, but it's there nonetheless. The vicar wife have half a mind to get the yard boy to seal it off with stones and cement, but it's only half a mind. And she never actually sent the boy into town to buy the bag of cement and the cement blocks to do the job. The vicar's wife tell her little girls about this tunnel, how they mustn't go into it, how it have monsters that live down in there, how any little girls go in there, they never come back out. The tunnels is where bad men go to die, says the mother. Men that are too bad to rest easy in their graves, down in those tunnels, walking about night and day, looking for more badness, harvesting souls for the devil. The mother tell them, but the little girl with the good sense listen, and the one that don't have any get more curious than ever. This sister question her mother, wonder what in the tunnels that's so sweet she warning her away from it. Because this good-for-nothing girl already developing a taste for things her mother tell her not to have. This slack from she born, forthright sister, already thinking that some bad things real sweet. And if something's so sweet, it can be evil. This sister thinking to herself, it not that dark, it not that spooky. What's the use of a tunnel if you don't get to see where it leads? It's just this kind of tunnel that this sister decides she must explore, say Wilma. So she ups herself one evening when her mother was taking tea with the doctor wife. It was important matters they was talking, says Wilma, because the vicar's wife was a good mother, not one to leave her children alone even for a few seconds. But a few seconds is all the devil needs. That's the end of the extract.
I love it. I love it. I love it. And I like how the devil and the need and okay, so right on to Lisa now. Go ahead, Lisa.
So that's a great segue. Thank you.
I know. Perfect. You think we planned it, right?
So the bread the devil need as in bread.
Yes.
Is about, it is, well, two things you need to know. The title is a sort of traditional Trinidadian saying about sort of the long game then, the eventual outcome of bad decisions or bad behaviors. You will eat the bread the devil need. And so that's the first thing. And the second thing is that most of the narrative is written in Trinidad Creole, first person. But the section I'm going to read from now is one of the flashback sections, and that's in standard English.
Yes.
So this is when the lead character, Alicia, is a 5-year-old child. Happy New Year, Marcia. The man's voice was funny. Like the man on the radio singing, I heard it through the grapevine. He was small and skinny with straight black hair, golden skin, and eyes like black buttons. His eyebrows were straight lines across his forehead, as thin as his lips. Mommy, Alicia whispered urgently. Who is that? Hush your mouth, girlie. Who talking to you? The strange man stood up, holding a baby who fussed but went back to sleep when the man rocked him against his chest. Shh, shh, Colin, nice boy, the man murmured. Mommy hadn't moved. Alicia peeped around her skirt at the visitors, and the motion drew her mother's attention. Gilly, go and get and change your clothes. As Alicia scuttled into the next room, she heard Mommy's voice from behind the curtain. Mommy wasn't whispering, but she dropped her voice low enough that Alicia had to strain to hear her. She was angry. It sounded like she was biting her words up before she spat them out at the man. Marcia! He no longer sounded like the radio man. He sounded just like Mommy now and just as vexed. This is Colin. I brought him here because his mother, she can't mind him. I was hoping you would. Mind him? Mommy was laughing softly. You do your shit in America and expect me to clean up after you? Mind your little nigger baby, eh, big brother? The man sucked his teeth. You feel you're white or what? You forget Ma blacker than this boy. Just because we come out looking a little whitish, don't forget, you's as much of a nigger as he is. Whap! You're too damn fast, Mommy screamed. The baby woke up, crying loudly. Mommy jeered, take your nigger baby and get out my house, Alan. Go back to America or go to hell, I don't care. Just don't come back here. Who you feel you is? The man was shouting now. Marcia, warning you. What you gonna do, man? Alicia heard the sound of flesh hitting flesh, and Mommy cried out, Oh God! Oh God! Alicia peered through the crack between the curtain and the door frame. Mommy was bending down with her arm over her head, just like Alicia did when Mommy was beating her. The man, Alan, stood a foot in front of her, shouting at her. Snot and tears poured down the baby boy's face. Without a thought, Alicia pulled the curtain aside and stepped between the adults, reaching for the screaming boy. Don't mind, baby, don't mind, Alicia crooned. Colin stopped yelling and looked into her face. They smiled at each other. In the bedroom, Alicia sang to the boy. Clap hand for girlie till Mommy come. Bring cake and sugar plum, give baby some. The boy's laughter cut the air.
Wow, wow, wow. Such powerful readings. I know that everybody listening in, I mean, we're just in awe. And I love how in both books, at some level, there is the whole thing about parental and even grandparent violence and the way in which family dynamics we tend to do violence to each other. This session is called Love is War. So in the context of intimate partner violence, I want to ask my first question about the link between love and war as they appear in your books, particularly what are the ways in which the main characters in Cherie's books, Lala and Aiden, and Alicia and Leo in your book, Lisa, are in love but at war. So let's start with you, Lisa.
Yeah, definitely the relationship between the main character, Alicia, who is also known as Girlie when she's small, and who is also known in her business life as Miss Ali because she's the supervisor, Miss Ali. And so Miss Ali is in love with a man who is wonderful in so many respects, but he's abusive and he's controlling and he is destroying her soul. But she feels that because he is also good to her and he's really good in bed. He's good. Look, let's be frank. You know, he's really good in bed, and she has a kind of she has a sex problem, you know, where she feels like this is something that, although it is part of the abuse that she suffered as a young person, it's also like still the one thing she can control. So there's this tension between wanting to have the relationship with the man, not wanting to get beaten, possibly afraid of being hurt seriously or killed, but also feeling like I love him and I need him.
Yes, 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 yes. And you know, in a real sense, I guess the relationship is how she tries to work out maybe that sense of self-worth and that sense of who am I if I don't have Leo, and can I really stand on my own? And you know, and I love how in the end the readers get to see her. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but she comes around in terms of discovering herself in a very interesting way. Um, Cherie, how about Lala and Aiden? What are the ways in which they're in love but at war?
Well, you know, I have this saying. It's not my saying. I can't remember where I got it, but basically it goes, the opposite of love is not hate, it's indifference. And I was kind of thinking about that a little bit while I was going through the. And to me, both characters are looking for love in a sense. For Lala, it is about, I think, a connection to her mother. She associates love with, you know, singing her name in just the right way. I think she associates a certain type of love and care with her mom. And I think what makes Aiden so attractive is, besides his physical beauty, it is the fact that he connects with that and he tries to do that for her. He tries to reproduce that for her. So I think that's very compelling for Lala. But I actually don't think that love, true love, real love, can be about war. I think for Aiden, it is more about control. It is about frustration, and it's about the ways in which he acts out these emotions and these feelings on Lala, literally on Lala. But I actually don't think either of them is in love with the other, although they're both looking for love, and perhaps there are elements one in the other, one finds in the other, each finds in the other, that kind of seems to answer that need. But I think both characters are really searching, trying to understand what love is for them and how they express love. I mean, for me, Aiden, for example, is clearly capable of love in terms of how he relates to his baby, but he doesn't have that for Lala. So for me, it is about exploring love and the expression of love. But I think as it relates to genuine love, I don't think that that's what's going on there in that relationship.
And can you contrast, to the follow-up now, could you contrast a little with the relationship between Lala and Tone, who is a character in the book that I personally fell in love with? So that's another side of love. I don't you want to speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, you know, I think one of the things about Lala and Tone is that their love, to me, is based on a genuine friendship with the other person and a true knowledge of the other person, even the dark, dank secrets, for want of a better term. And they understand each other in a certain way. And I think that's why it's easy to understand the sacrifice that Tone makes for Lala at the end of the novel, which for me is one of the expressions and demonstration of the true love that he has for Lala. Although Tone, perhaps like Aiden, exists in very difficult circumstances, socially, financially, you know, Tone has taken a lot of the tragedy that he's experienced, made him more resilient, although he struggles with, you know, some of the issues that he's faced. So for me, the relationship between Lala and Tone is just much more, it's pure, it's tender, it's based on a genuine knowledge of the other person and a genuine desire to see them get what's best for them or what they want, you know, despite the feeling of self. It's a lot less selfish. And I think that's part of what makes it so beautiful.
Yes, and so for people who haven't read it yet, so Tone is Aidan's friend. So he's the friend of Lala's husband. So that additional complication is there. And so I want to touch on something else that's quite interesting is that in both books, things don't really end well for the abusers. I'm not going to say exactly what happened. And you paint the abuser in such a complex, multi-layered way. So it really reflects the way people are. They're not any one thing. So you demonstrate empathy for them without condoning their behavior, which is a very delicate balance to strike. And I wanted to know for each of you, what were your feelings about these abusive characters and how hard was it writing them? And did you learn anything while writing them? And so the writers in the room can hear and learn about how to strike that balance when you're doing a character that you don't particularly like, but you know you have to render truthfully. Let's start with Lisa.
So there are a number of different abusive characters in the book. There is Ali's mother, Marcia, the one who's getting licked in the extract I just read. There's also Leo, the boyfriend, and there is another relative. And these are painted, to use your word, as, I guess the mother is kind of flatter than some of the other characters because she is mostly just violent to the child, as we are as parents in the Caribbean. And I'm not even apologizing. We do this. We talk to our kids any old way. We drag them around. We slap them up. And we're like just generally mean to them. And then we're surprised when they come out messed up. We're like, what? What happened to you? But so there's this, but there are also moments like, so in that extract I just read, the abused child is singing a beautiful lullaby to this baby that she just met. So she's learned tenderness somewhere. So there's clearly another layer that we haven't seen. And the abusive boyfriend, he loves her. He do what we just call put her in the house. You know what I mean? And for a Caribbean man to decide that he wants to actually put this woman in house and not, you know, she's not a side piece. She's not an outside thing. She's not a girl he does check. That's his woman. You know, it's a declaration and it's not meaningless. And he does nice things for her. It's just that, you know, the wiring in his head is misfiring so that, you know, he is trapped in his own patterns. And we see that very clearly, that in a kind of a way, he is as helpless as she is within the abusive situation. So I think, I think I really was led to give him some depth and some.
Oh, yeah, but was it hard to write that, knowing that he's doing awful things, but he
All of
himself
it was hard to write, Sharma. All of it was hard.
So I guess I'm trying to pull out from you for, you know, we have writers who are listening in, like any advice when you're writing something that's so, you know, difficult, you know, so hard when you have to have empathy for that main character who's playing awful in how he treats this woman, you know, any insights that they can do?
I watch a lot of TV. There's this great American drama called Dexter, who is about, he's a serial killer. He murders people. In every episode, he murders at least one person. And, but he's charming. He's friendly. He's a lovely guy. I mean, he's the kind of guy you'd want to be friends with. He's really loyal. He'll do anything for you unless he's trying to kill you. And even sometimes if he's trying to kill you. So I think there's some great models for thinking about villains or antagonists that, you can study art to learn art. Yeah,
Yes,
so that's a
yes,
good start.
yes. So, thank you, Lisa. Cherie?
So for me, in terms of writing Aiden, when the story first came to me, or when I received this story, um, it was the scene where Aiden and Lala tussled over the baby, and we know, those of us who might have read it, what happens as a result of that. And I remember being so compelled to write the novel, the story as a whole, but also really, really curious as to what would have led both characters to be involved in a situation like that. For me personally, I've found in life, I've met so many people at different stages of life. There are people that I would have known when I was younger, and I thought maybe they were horrid people. And then, they have a couple more experiences in life, and I meet them later, and my view of them might be different. Or, we differently based on, or we act and we experience things based on, the sum of a number of different circumstances. And for me, people are complex. People are complex. Who they are, who they present at any particular point in time, is a result of a lot of things. I think we're all of us on this continuum between, good and bad. And we can be further along to one side or the other, depending on our circumstances, the choices we've made, the things we've experienced. So for me, in painting a character like Aiden, I wanted to get into that. I wanted to really understand how this character came to be who he is when we meet him. In terms of how I went about doing that, I think first of all it was about asking myself those kinds of questions. And I mean, even though Aiden is so terrible to Lala in the story, Aiden is at some level Tone's friend, and he appears to be a doting father to Baby. And I thought, well, that's how it is in real life. That's how it is with people that I've met. And to me, it was just about trying to explore some of those latent aspects, or some of the things that would not be immediately obvious, and trying to bring those across. It was quite difficult to write certain scenes that Aiden was involved in. I actually found that trying to write the softer, more positive aspects of his personality was a bit of a relief for me. So that's what I'll say about that.
Well, this is a perfect time to ask the audience question that came in, which seems to fit right into where we are. It's a question from Micheline Adams via YouTube. And she says, as women who live in countries where gender-based violence is common, was writing, in terms of writing these novels, did writing them affect you in different ways? And was the writing cathartic at all? So we'll start with you, Cherie, and then Lisa can answer.
So yes, writing this novel definitely did affect me. I think I've said before that as a survivor of domestic violence myself, writing a story about domestic violence and going into some of these experiences that Lala has at that depth was actually quite difficult. It was wrenching. I mean, I had, on some occasions I had, stretches of months where I just put down the manuscript and I wouldn't look at it, and I do all sorts of other things other than, continue writing the story that I felt compelled to write it. But it was just too much for me. It was really wrenching. But that there was also something very empowering about writing this story. I actually feel that my experiences made me better equipped to tell Lala's story, even though her story isn't mine. I think maybe I understood certain aspects of her character a little bit better because of my own experiences. So that's one thing. I think the other thing was that it was really empowering as a writer to be able to choose how I depicted that violence. So it was really important to me that the episodes of violence in the book did not focus on the gore. There was no kind of gratuitous element to it that people would read it and kind of get lost in just the violence of the event itself and forget about, you know, the impact on Lala, the impact on the wider community. I wanted to go more into the psychological than in the physical, although, you know, what would have been happening physically would have been really horrible. So I found it really empowering to be able to make that choice, and that was deliberate. You know, I've read other books by Caribbean writers. I can think of The Hills Were Joyful Together as one. And I remember reading some of the scenes where this male character, you know, one where he chopped up his wife, his girlfriend, his woman. And I was just, you know, I had to put down that book at some points just because of how the violence was portrayed, how it came across. And I think I kind of got lost on some of what I would consider to be the more important considerations, how this impacted the victim, how it impacted the wider community and so on because of the war. So for me personally, it was really empowering to be able to choose to do it differently. And I felt really, really good about that. So that's how it, you know, affected me.
Okay, thanks, Cherie. How about you, Lisa? Was writing this book cathartic in any way?
Cathartic and being able to get it out, yes, great. Finish it, yeah, twice, yay, because I rewrote the whole book. Listen, I am also a survivor of, well, not not really, not man woman thing, right? But like as a child, and there is a lot of my feeling, I think, not the situation, but my feeling in it. I can't remember. I wrote this book so long ago. I can't remember how I felt when I was writing it, to be honest, because I blanked a lot of things out. Survival.
Yeah.
But I know that when I was working as a journalist and I focused a lot on mental health issues, I remember that writing about suicide made me feel really bad. I mean, like hole, like deep hole, fall in. So I know that I must have been affected, but I can't tell you honestly.
Yeah.
You know,
Understood.
but it's always important, I think, when you're writing about these things that are personally weighty for you, and nobody can tell you which one is more weighty for you. It's your weight, you know it. It's very important to have people to talk to. I have a bunch of readers around who I send my stuff to. I talk about my stuff with, discuss. Is this sex gratuitous? Is this, you know, is this violence too much? Is this character too soppy? What, you know, and that feedback helps me process the emotion too.
Yes.
Yeah?
And that's very important for writers. Okay, thank you, Lisa. We have a question from a Facebook viewer. Michelle Selman asked, Black women are impacted by many intersectionalities and societal expectations of being strong and moving on without healing their trauma. What are your thoughts on intergenerational trauma and recovery? Let's start with Cherie.
That's a great question. And that was one of the themes that I think the How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House explored. So yes, there is this expectation that Black women and Black Caribbean women especially will be strong and endure trauma and come out on the other end. And I think what we don't talk about enough is how those scars, how those experiences impact and shape future generations. So if we look, for example, at the character of Wilma in the novel, Wilma, you know, we might read the book and kind of think, well, Wilma is actually awful to her granddaughter. She's not very empathetic. You know, I'm not going to give too much away, but it's kind of like you read it and think, what could she be thinking? How could she see her daughter and then her granddaughter going through these experiences and respond in the way that she does? At one point in the book is described as it's almost wooden. And for me, it was important, therefore, to examine Wilma's own story. And when we do that, we see that Wilma herself was a product of violence. She was a product of a type of abuse. And one of the things that I find is that, you know, you can say, you know, how can we stop or how can we seek to change or to address intergenerational trauma? But I think for a lot of these, they just survive what happens to them, but they're left ill-equipped to assist anybody else to get through a similar experience. And that is part of the trauma of what they've experienced. So at no point in this novel does Wilma have an open and honest communication with either her daughter or her granddaughter about things that happened to her. And I think that is one of the key omissions that helps to perpetuate similar circumstances that then, you know, are experienced by her daughter and granddaughter. So to me, yes, there is that expectation. And one of the things that I will say is that I think we as women do a lot of damage to other women, you know, within our families and, you know, our nuclear families and our wider family in society by actually perpetuating some of the same abuses that we might have experienced against each other. And I think the whole issue, some of the issues that Wilma and Lala experience come out of that. So yes, there is that expectation that women be strong. And, you know, Esme experiences that when, you know, she has this episode, this abusive episode, she runs to Wilma for her assistance. And Wilma more or less says, well, look, it don't make no sense crying and carrying on about this thing. This, you know, it's happened. Let me move on now. This is what I can do. I can send you this place. And that's how we as women do that to each other. So we are strong women, and we are part of the abuse to other women, you know. So I think it's wonderful to be able to start having those types of conversations. I don't think we mean ill necessarily all the time, but I think we're ill-equipped to deal with some of these.
Yeah, and in a way, in our silence, we become co-conspirators with the abusers, you know, because we don't have the tools to have a conversation and to bring this out in the open and put it under the carpet, you know, and in doing that, do more damage. Definitely.
May I say?
Yeah, Lisa, jump in.
I think this is the first generation of Caribbean woman of any race that is actively and enthusiastically trying to pursue that heritage of intergenerational violence, intergenerational abuse, and what are the roots and what are the fruits. I think in work like Shivani's, talk about a book you had to put down.
Yeah.
You read one poem and it guts you because it's so familiar, because it's your story, it's your auntie's story, it's your mother's story, it's your granny's story, but nobody talks about it. It's brushed under the carpet. All of us who have, you know, these terrible family histories that we never talk about with our family, even within our family. And we just pretend like it never happened, and we try to move on. So it's just this suppression of the histories is, I think, incredibly culpable in the way that we perpetuate those histories.
Definitely. And Loretta Collins Coba, I hope I'm not mispronouncing her name. Cloba, thank you. Via YouTube says, Lisa's novel Home, which addresses a girl's mental illness and recovery process, has been read by several readers in Puerto Rico now. Intergenerational trauma is a theme in that novel as well. And I mean, ladies, it's such an important topic, such a big topic. And you know, I'm mindful of our time. I want to get some more questions in. And I want to know, like, what do you most want your books to do in terms of this whole issue of intimate partner violence, or as we say, intergenerational violence? Like, what do you want to leave your readers with? Is there one thing that, you know, you'd want people to go away having read your books, you know, having a fresh eye or fresh consideration, or is there some message that you'd want to leave with them? I know they said the best writing is not preachy, it's subtle, it's, you know, it's a rendering that people take their own meaning from. But I'm going to start with you, Lisa, on that one.
The thing I would most like readers to think about is that the woman sitting next to you in the maxi might have a whole different story, so you don't know. And that the roots of these kinds of situations are not so simple. Don't judge. And there's hope.
Yes.
My book is a fiction that, as Cherie said, I received. Yes, it was sent. But I also feel that this character is, in a very real way, relatable. As they say, I hate that word. I don't believe I'm using it. Oh God, she's relatable, and that if she gets away, you could get away.
Yes, yes, yes. There's hope. There is hope. Cherie, thanks, Lisa. Cherie, how about you?
Um, you know, what I hope that people find in How the One-Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is like I keep saying, like a safe space to examine this issue. My own experience has been, you know, it's a tough thing for us to talk about. We don't talk about intimate partner violence or any type of violence really very easily in the Caribbean, especially when it's close to home. And I would just hope that in reading this story, people are able to ask some difficult questions and have some tough conversations around these issues. I would like it to be that it kind of opens up a space, a difficult room to go in. I hope that when people get into the room, you know, they come inside and then the door is closed behind them and it's locked and you can't get it. You kind of have to face it. But then I hope that when you emerge, you know, you're a little bit richer for the experience and you're able to have that conversation in real life. That's what I would hope.
Yeah, I love that, Cherie. As you're talking, like, you know, just got an image of somebody holding up a mirror and saying, you know, look, don't close your eyes, don't turn away, look, you have to look, you know. I love that. There's a question from Facebook. John Arnold asked, understanding the theory of feminism, do you feel that men are getting the message and dropping the weapons of war? And what is the impact of COVID? I guess this latter part has to do with now that people are working from home and stuck at home with their abusers. So do you think men are dropping the weapons of war, and how is COVID impacting this whole issue of gender-based violence? Lisa, you can take that one first.
From what I've read, no, apparently men are not dropping the weapons of war. And that's sad. And again, according to what I've read, COVID has made it worse because, as you said there, you know, you're now trapped 24/7 with this person who wants to kill you.
Yes.
So it's been a challenge. You know what, I'm a feminist, but I will say that feminism, and not that it was feminism's responsibility to do so, but feminism left men behind. And men have a kind of like most men are like sort of like staring around going, well, where did all the chicks go? I don't understand what's happening here. And so there's a real disconnect between the feminist movement and most men. Some of them are kind of now getting it because, you know, American pop culture has picked it up and whatever else. But, you know, deep inside, I think a lot of men still don't get it and feel they have the right to discipline a woman. So, you know, it's complex.
Yes.
And it's not going to change until men themselves decide this is unacceptable. Boys, let's do something about this, because no woman is going to tell a man stop beating me, and he listened. I'm sorry. Am I being too frank?
We want frankness here, Lisa. Trust me, people who know me know I'm very direct, so I really appreciate the frankness. Cherie, your thoughts?
Um, I think that this topic is now beginning to be something that we acknowledge as a problem. I don't think, maybe immediately post independence, I don't same approach or the same understanding as a society, as a people, about intimate partner violence. And I think that just being able to have some of these conversations is progress. And I think men are becoming involved in these conversations, but I think it's still very early days. So I don't think that we are yet at the point where behavior is changing. So I agree with Lisa in that regard. In terms of COVID has been an interesting experience to me in so many ways, because, I think that I believe, and based on what I've read in terms of the research, a big part of the problem or the genesis of intimate partner violence is the whole question of how we perform gender, how we understand gender, and what our ideals are as it relates to the role of a man and the role of a woman, especially in the Caribbean. And to me, COVID has just brought that so much to the forefront. As a single mom, for example, one of the great things about COVID is now we accept, remote working is possible. We can have people working from home. It's more, it's more fluid in terms of your ability to work and contribute in that way while still dealing with your household and your family. But the other thing that's been really interesting to me is to see how women have been left behind context of the pandemic. In the Caribbean, for example, we had a situation in Barbados where, we had COVID and so on, so there was lockdown. People were expected to work remotely and be accessible on the computer and so on. But if you were a mom, you had to be, or parent, a single parent, you had to be homeschooling at the same time. I mean, that was a little, as we would say, that was a little piece of old hell for me. I don't know about other people, but so, COVID to me has brought some of these issues to the forefront. That would have been something that might have been more difficult, certainly for me as a single mom and for other single moms or other single parents. I think COVID has heightened or has highlighted why we need to be having some of those conversations about gender and about how we perform gender and understand gender. And I think that eventually that will have an impact on intimate partner violence and similar issues.
Okay,
May
great.
I jump in with one brief comment?
Sure, Lisa, because we have about 10 minutes left. I told Nicholas we needed 3 hours for this session, but he just took me on.
I just wanted to say that my International Women's Day Facebook post was an epic rant. You can go look it up.
About that.
Epic rant about this whole issue about how governments say they care and people say they care and they really don't give one ass about women because the proof is in the pudding and we eating it.
Yes, it's the bread the devil need, Lisa.
Indeed.
It is. And listen, I so enjoyed our conversation. I'm looking at the clock. I want to ask Bob, like so many questions I wanted to ask. And I'm sure the viewers are all, really, really taking a lot from this.
I want to do my second reading.
You want to do second reading? Please talk to Nicholas offline. We need a part 2. Nicholas, you hear that? But I want to give each of you, I guess he types in the chat and says, I hear. But I like one of the questions I wanted to ask and asking, what inspired the work, and each of you have strong female leads. I wanted to hear about, the journey that each one takes over the course of the book. But I guess that's something that we want each person listening to buy the books and to read them and see. But I love how, these characters aren't, woes me damsels in distress necessarily. They're working through, they're active participants in their own story. And I think that's the beauty of of both books, that, you have women who are writing about women and rendering them as truthfully, in all their strength, in all their power, in all their weakness, their vulnerabilities, and their loves, their hates, their dislikes. And, you know, both books are just simply potent. And so if you've not read them yet, order Lisa's, get Cherie's, definitely add these to your book list. And I'm gonna give each of you any final words, 2 minutes each. Let's start with you, Cherie. Maybe you want to tell us what you're up to next, or what do you need us to know? You have 2 minutes.
2 minutes. Well, right now I'm actually working on a second novel, based on, it's set on a cocoa plantation in Trinidad in the mid 19th century. Yes, in Trinidad. And it's mainly, the main character is an 8-year-old girl called Nib. So that's really exciting. It's also requiring quite a bit of research. Unlike this one, I think I had less that I had to dig into, but this one is requiring some digging. And it was inspired by, I had a trip to Trinidad on business in September 2019, toured a cocoa plantation, and this story and this character just came to me. So that's what I'm working now. I'm also working on a collection of flash fiction, which is really short stories, 300 words or less. And there, I would have to say my flash fiction is nothing like my longer fiction, but those are the two projects that I'm working on. And if you want to connect with me and, find out more about the book or anything, you can find me on Instagram at Cherie Jones Writes, and on Facebook at Cherie Jones Writes, or Twitter, CSAJ the Writer.
Perfect. Thank you, Cherie. You know I love you. I put that plug in there. She's one of my friends. So this is such an honor to, when you interview your friend, it's like, this don't feel like work. Anyway, and I've just met Lisa and in love with her too. Go ahead, Lisa. So what do you want us to know in the last 2 minutes? Lisa, have you frozen? Okay, I think Lisa may be having some technical challenges. While we wait for her to sort that out, I'm going to make a comment that LaFleur Coburn, who I also know, says via YouTube, the discussion in Love is War is layered with so much intersectionality. Love it. I just want to add that the way Caribbean societies define love is in itself a conduit for generational trauma, which is a very profound statement, LaFleur. Lisa, are you back with us?
I am back with you. Do I still have 2 minutes?
No, you have a minute now. Go ahead.
I have a minute now?
Yes.
You can find out all about my current, future, past, and imagined projects on my social media. You can check me on Facebook at my name, Lisa Allen Agostini. And you can also look at the comedic short films I did for the Bocas Lit Fest, which if you hang around after this panel, just look out for anything that doesn't look like this. I did it. I was fortunate to be invited to produce some shorts, comedic shorts as sort of palate cleansers. And I was blessed with a really great team, including my brother, Dennis Allen, and Cedric Smart, Carissa Babwa, a bunch of really great people who helped me work on these things. And I'm kind of terrified to think that I'm becoming a filmmaker, but
oh, that's exciting, Lisa.
Yes.
Oh, goodness.
That's it.
Oh. And I see many film projects in your future, and also you, Cherie. I think like reading both books, I can see them as movies too. Like the way in which you write is just wow. I can see films. And so I'm looking forward to more work from both of you ladies. And I'm going to put my shameless plug in as well. My debut novel, What a Mother's Love Don't Teach You, is coming out with Braga Press next year, summer. So 2022, God willing, and it explores the idea of a mother and a woman named Dinah who gave up her son to her employers 18 years ago. And she meets this boy who she's convinced is her long lost son, and the novel explores what happens as a result of that. There is some aspect of, intergenerational violence and the whole aspect of how your life can shift when you don't have a mother in it, or how it can shift when you do have a mother that's perhaps not ideal. And so, there's so many, exciting projects that all of us here are working on. And Nicholas is telling me I should tell you to check out the website for the new Friends of Bocas that was just launched this evening. So definitely check that out. After this session, we'll have, Shivani can correct me, the 100 Caribbean books that made us. That's right after this. So please make sure that you stick around. Also, if you missed any of the sessions, I mean, the Bocas Lit Fest has been amazing, and we're now wrapping up, I guess, in the final day. So YouTube, you can go on YouTube and watch the sessions that you missed. Definitely check them out. And I have to take this opportunity to thank Nicholas, Shivani, the technical team, everybody in the background who worked to ensure that we were able to have this session. And to thank the listeners and viewers, and thank you for spending your hour with us. We really, really appreciated it. And, I so wish I could have both ladies for, longer. And if you want to keep up with us, as Cherie and Lisa said, you can follow them on their socials. And my Twitter handle is I am Sharma Taylor. So you can easily find me on Twitter. And it's been just a great rating it. Do you have any more last words? I see the countdown clock. I have 2 minutes and 20 seconds.
I could have well do my second reading. I'm really annoyed. I'm very annoyed.
But look here, we've given them a good teaser, Lisa. So you know what this means.
No. I'm very annoyed. What my last words would be: continue to keep supporting Caribbean literature. If you're out there, buy a book, and also buy a book for a young person. Yes. And give it to them, because sometimes the choice is between food, shoes, school books, and a book.
Yes, so definitely. Do that. Definitely, I agree. Thank you, Lisa. Cherie, a minute. Cherie, did you freeze? The quote of the year, Lisa, is unmute yourself. You froze. Like, we weren't saying these things before 2020. Doesn't everybody know? Unmute yourself.
I don't really have it.
Go ahead, Cherie.
Is it still the same? Can you hear me?
We're having some technical things at the end, but
how it is with technology. What will go wrong?
Well, Cherie, you've turned into a robot, actually, and we have 57 seconds left. So I'm going to plug your books again and say, again, I've read both of these. And when I tell you they're brilliant. And they've both told the story in very interesting ways. Cherie uses alternating viewpoints in third-person standard English. And even she used first-person plural, so that's we. Lisa does some very interesting things in the first person Trini Creole, as well as in third person standard English. And there's innovation in the way that they craft these stories. The stories themselves can be complicated, but the innovative way in which Cherie and Lisa pull them together, it draws you in. And there's nothing gratuitous, nothing in there for the sake of, okay, violence or sex. It's a very nuanced telling of the stories. And I urge you, if you don't have books, go out, order them, and support Caribbean literature. And we're out of time, ladies. Thanks again. Nicholas just texted me, time up, exclamation mark. Thank you for being with us, listeners, viewers, and thank you, Lisa and Cherie.
As title sponsors of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest, We at NGC look upon the journey of the past 10 years with great pride and a deep sense of accomplishment. This has been one of our flagship sustainability initiatives, and we are happy to celebrate this milestone anniversary with the Bocas team. Today, we look forward to deepening our impact beyond energy, supporting the UN Sustainable Development Goals through our green agenda and initiatives which are more future-focused and for the purpose of gaining greater insight on how we are positively affecting the lives of people and communities. The work of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest fully aligns with our sustainability focus as it supports UN targets in education, arts and culture, empowerment and economic development, among others. This alignment strengthens our commitment to this festival, as well as our conviction that with the Bocas team, we stand in good company to build a better foundation for the people of our country and the wider region.
Everyone has a dream, a vision of what we want. The things that make us happy and help us make others happy. Let First Citizens help you paint a brighter future. A new home. A new car. A new day of living stress-free. Make the things you picture a reality.
First Citizens, we put you first.
The Bocas Festival is probably the premier literary festival this side of the hemisphere. It sounds a bit like an exaggeration, but it's not, it's true. Amazing people, wonderful opportunities to exchange ideas, to share views, and just to feel good, about being here. And, we know that you all have good rum in this place here. I haven't tried it yet, but I don't even think I need it to feel good. So, yeah, it's wonderful. As a writer, it's great. There is a genuine interest in the work that one produces. And you get it by the feedback, by the attendance to the events. You get it by the kinds of questions the audience asks. But also, as an associate editor, it's very fulfilling to see writers whose work you've read in advance as manuscript, or you've played some small part towards its restructuring, rewriting, refining, editing, honing. That those works, they arrive eventually fully formed, and one has a sense of having, played a part in that too. And of course, for me, one of my best working experiences is the current one, working with Jeremy Pointing and Hannah Bannister at People Tree Press. And I'm not saying this because I want to keep the job. I'm saying it because it's true. Yeah, though I do want to keep the job because it's such a fulfilling one. Strategic People Tree Press, as you know, is probably, in fact, it's definitely the most important, strategically important press for literary fiction in particular, and for poetry. This side of the Atlantic, it's extremely important, and it's good to be part of such a strategic and what will be eventually historically an extremely important enterprise as People Tree Press. So yeah, I'm benefiting on both sides. I'm cutting it both ways.
Having been to several of the events so far, what panels or readings or exchanges, either formal or informal, have really resonated with you so far? There was a So Many Islands one where we talked about the short story, which in fact is one of my principal preoccupations at the moment. We had other forums, and interestingly enough, it's not always the programmed events. Sometimes it's just sitting with people that you meet for the first time, or you meet more meaningfully for the second time, exploring ideas, which sometimes, as happened, for example, with Jennifer Rahim, who won the fiction prize at this year's Bocas Festival, her talking to me about her work and the ideas behind it, which I find impressive and sophisticated and grounded. That in itself helps me to look at fiction and my own fiction in an interesting way too. When she talked about the structure of her work and the way she approached it. So all of these elements here. There have been quite a few events. I have a very shallow memory, by the way, but overall the feeling is good, and one can only go by one's own subjectivity. It's fiction after all. For me, and has been proven, and as has been proven historically, all fiction, in my view, should be preoccupied with the exigencies of its time, with the crises, if you like, of its time. And fiction, in a way, can have, the best fiction do have, a kind of prescience about it, a way of projecting imaginatively into the future, has a way of exploring and quite often helping us to understand consequences, and the implications of what is happening at any given point in time. And it seems to me that one of the pressing themes, preoccupations, subject matter, if you like, of fiction is in fact the fragility of our island states. So we spend a lot of time talking about the political relationship between island states, and we looked at the historical commonalities. It would be, for me, it is becoming increasingly imperative that we look at what to me is a threat to our very own physical existence as island states, which in a way eclipses and precludes all the other preoccupations we have. I am extremely exercised by that at the moment, to the extent where I have actually revisited a book that I've been working on for many years now, and in a way reshaped it to embrace quite fully that preoccupation with the fragility of our states, the fact that it's being threatened. And that, I think people forget this, that it's not our fault, it's not our doing. It's a statement about the power relations between, powerful industrial nations and nations like ours who we didn't enter anybody's fight, yet the consequences of that fight in terms or the consequences of the excesses of these nations are felt by us. And I think in addressing that, we cannot help but address not simply what is happening to us presently in real time, but the causes of it and the nature of the relationship between ourselves and other larger, more powerful states who have quite, in my view, irresponsibly, I may go as far as to say criminally, brought us to this point of danger, of vulnerability. You need to be here to get a sense of what a real community of writers can be and has to offer in terms of knowledge, generosity, warmth, imaginative, intellectual, cerebral stimulation. For me, it's an absolutely great opportunity and a fabulous event. You understand? And you know the extent to which I love everybody here. And what maybe there? Yeah. And you know, in a really serious way, it is important. It's absolutely worth coming. You know, Trinidad has a lot to offer. The Bocas has even more to offer because the Bocas is trans-Caribbean. I may even say transnational.
Celebrating Caribbean voices and preserving the rich tapestry of our culture. Through literary arts and authorship, we are free to express our vibrance, passion, heritage, and the empowering narratives of our people. As proud title sponsor of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest, we have been honored to support one of the world's acclaimed literary festivals. We celebrate your journey and salute your accomplishments.
Now, start now. Hello and welcome to the Bocas Lit Zest. I am your host, Bookie Monster, the book Zessa. And today, we interpret a touching coming-of-age novel set in the Caribbean, Crick Crack Monkey. The story is realistic, the characters are audacious, and the themes are universal. It is an enduring classic. And now, an excerpt from Crick Crack Monkey with puppets.
All right, this is Lionel Wildmane of WATT What FM, and we're here at the General Hospital with, we believe his name is Milford the Monkey, where it is believed he has broken his back and apparently other bones on a piece of pomerac, one of our local fruit. Let's hear directly from this gentleman about what the events are. We go right to him. Mr. Milford. Mr. Milford?
Wait, there's live TV? On TV?
Okay, now, you're saying that you can't recall this, but it is obvious that you have sustained some injuries, apparently to your leg here and to your arm. How is it that you cannot recall this? Has it indeed affected your memory?
I don't recognize what you're talking about, you know. Nothing happened. What happened?
Please don't deny it. It's clear that there's been an accident here, and it seems from the doctor's reports that it was in fact fruit related.
I don't even know. Yeah, look.
Have you always been addicted to pomerac?
I don't even like pomerac. I don't even eat pomerac. Everybody know I don't eat pomerac.
Mr. Milford, there's no need to be ashamed. I have had a pomerac problem myself, as have many of us. Tell us what happened.
I don't know what you're talking about. I denying everything. Everybody know it's a fake man. It's a fake man. All you go from here.
Claim not to like pomerac, and yet it's obvious that there has been some giving over of yourself to the fruit. And now you're suffering and in pain.
I don't remember if it affected my memory.
Well, viewers, there we have it. Although Mr. Milford is denying it, the extent of the pain he appears to be in appears to have affected his memory, his personality, and apparently also his sense of humor, funny bone, and his ability to tell us the truth. This is Lionel Wildmane reporting again from the General Hospital with Mr. Milford, who is not only lying here, but apparently is lying. WWATT FM. What? Back to you in the studio.
What a performance, my fellow bookzessers. That was an excerpt from Crick Crack Monkey. You know, between you and me, I did never think Monkey would have stooped so low as to break his back for a piece of pomerac or even a whole ham sack. I just saying. But join us again for another episode of the Bocas Lit Fest. Until then, I am your host, Bookie Monster, reminding you, more reading, less stressing, is books have we zested, is ideas we wetting, and knowledge we getting. Bookie out!
One Caribbean Media continues its commitment to the Bocas Lit Fest with the sponsorship of the 2021 Bocas Lit Prize. Now more than ever, we recognize the invaluable role that Caribbean literature and those who create it play in our lives, and do not hesitate to support their development through this continued partnership. As we navigate past these times and into the future, the OCM Group looks forward to the continued growth and success of the festival.
And I tell you, text me when you're ready. Hello, and welcome to the Bocas Lit Zest. I am Bookie Monster, the book zesser. Caribbean playwrights have long had to contend with the legacies of African, Indian, and European theatre. Now, in this arena, the words jump directly off the page and into the mouths of real characters. The ideas of the playwright become flesh and blood, or in this case, felt and stuffing. Now, we have an excerpt from the most famous of Caribbean plays, Teja and His Brothers, with puppets.
What happened to you, Tijan? Why are you crying? I'm so lonely, so lonely. Oh, why? I have nobody to play with. So you can't play by yourself? You want some cards? You could play Patience. You don't need nobody else to play Patience. I don't like Patience. I like Romy. You can't play Romy by yourself. Nah, to heck with that. All right, no need to get evil. Is you who ain't have no friends? You see, you two stink. I don't want to play with you. Calm down. I go tell my mommy. Shh, look, no need for that. You don't have to go so far. Mommy, this evil spider monster trying to thief me. Devil, leave my son alone. You want me to send his brothers for you? Boys, get him. Come back here. Come back here. Hey, all you want to play Romy? He feel he could. He feel he gonna get a... Come on. Mommy.
Come back here. Where you going? You think you're running? Come back here now.
That was an excerpt of Teja and His Brothers. Join us again for another episode of the Bocas Lit Zest. Until then, I am Bookie Monster, the book zesser, reminding you, more reading, less stressing. Is books have we zessin', is ideas we wettin', and knowledge we gettin'. Bookie out.
Good evening and welcome to the closing panel of TNT's 11th Annual Literary Festival and the 10th NGC Bocas Lit Fest. And my name is Audine Serju and I have the distinct honor of chairing this evening's closing panel that presents to you the final list of 100 Caribbean books that made us. And this evening's panel actually marks the culmination of a campaign that we ran over the last year or so, where we asked you to submit to us your titles, the Caribbean titles that you consider the ones to have made and shaped you. So this entire list that you're about to see is entirely crowdsourced from you, our Bocas Lit Fest audience. All right, and of course, if you didn't know, it was a campaign inspired by the reveal of the BBC's 100 novels that shaped us, and that was toward the end of 2019. And based on the engagement that post garnered, where because of the fact there were only 3 Caribbean titles, you know, people had a lot to say about that naturally, we felt we should make some space to create a list of our own, a list of 100 Caribbean books that made us. And you know what? We got just about over 300 submissions from you. And because we needed to get the list down to 100 as we promised, we enlisted the help of 12 people, academics, writers, avid readers, media personnel, to help us get the list down, to whittle that down to 100. A formidable task that it was. They managed to help us do that. And this is what we have to present to you today. And of course, we have three very distinguished people to help us discuss their findings and what they make of that list. But before we get to that, without any further ado, we give you the 100 Caribbean books that made us. And that's right, the discussion is only just the beginning. There you have it, folks, your list of 100 Caribbean books that made us. Now, I know in the slide, the images, if you're seeing it for the first time, if you haven't already checked out the list on our website, on the Bocas Lit Fest website, you might have missed some of the titles, but you can go there after the discussion, please, because we want your attention. We want to engage you in this fascinating conversation we're about to have with three very interesting and qualified, eminently qualified guests here this evening. So we have in this discussion, to help us break it down and make sense of what we just saw, we have with us Olive Senior, prize-winning author of several books. She is, including the Ocean Bocas Prize, I have to say. She's also the recently announced Poet Laureate of Jamaica. And while she normally resides in Canada, she is in Jamaica at present. So welcome to you, Olive. We have also with us Johnny Temple, who is the founder of Akashic Books, an independent New York City publishing house. He's also the editor and publisher there. That publishing house is actually known for its long-standing Caribbean presence on their list. Johnny is also the chair of the Brooklyn Literary Council. Welcome, Johnny.
Greetings.
And with us, finally, we have Aaron Kamugisha, no stranger to the Bocas Lit Fest like our other two participants. Aaron is a professor in cultural studies at UWI Cave Hill, and he is the editor of 8 collections of Caribbean and Africana thought. He's also a member, among many other things, he's also a member of the editorial collective of the Small Acts, of the journal Small Acts, a Caribbean journal of criticism. So if you didn't believe me, if you weren't sure, they are super qualified and ready to have this conversation. And I'll just invite all of our guests. We'll do a round robin where we just get your initial impressions. Now, this is not the first time you all are seeing the list. You've had the list for a slightly longer time than those looking on right now. So just give us a sense of what you make of the list. Olive, we can start with you.
Okay. I took the title very seriously, Books That Made Us. And so a lot of what I have to say has to do with that. What are these books that have shaped us as Caribbean individuals and as society? And I've divided the list into 2. I've taken out the 20 or so books that were published after the year 2000. And I want to focus first on the the other 80 books, which I think I've read all of them. They're in my library. They're in everybody's library. So the thing I want to say about that list is it is, to me, totally predictable. I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Really, what it is saying is, I mean, I'm thinking what it is reflecting is a choice about books based on education. To me, I'm seeing this as a list of books that was taught or people encountered either in high school or university. So there's that. The second list, the more recent books, I would say reflect a different world in which we're living, a world in which prizes, there's a whole lot more publicity about books. There's what I call the Bocas effect. So I think we could look at the books since 2000 as reflecting something else, the origins of those books. And then I would love us to talk before our time together is out about how books are being chosen right now, today, because I think I see that as a sort of generational thing. So I would just say about the basic list, I'm not surprised. There are lots of omissions, but the list is based mainly on fiction and poetry, mostly fiction. And so my big disappointment with it is that it does not engage with the post-colonial, post-independence intellectual tradition of the Caribbean, that is in the last 50 or so years. All the amazing work that has been done to tell us so much about ourselves. So in a way, it's a book list that mainly reflects what our creative writers are telling us, which is fine, you know, but those are just some of the things I would love to explore some more during our discussion.
Aaron, I'd like you to definitely talk about that. You know, as a Caribbean intellectual yourself and somebody committed to Caribbean intellectual thought and tradition, what were your findings around the nonfiction?
Yes, thank you very much, Ardeen. I found the list fascinating in and of itself, filled with a number of omissions, but also filled with some of the most fascinating texts that actually I do think have shaped us. I take Olive's point in terms of the fact that you can just see almost a CXC book list or a reading list that's come through there in terms of books that people read at school that had a deep and fascinating effect on them. But when I looked at the nonfiction list, I don't think actually I was surprised by the quantity of books on the nonfiction list. I think that what we were given in terms of summary statistics are 21 nonfiction, 63 fiction, 15 poetry, and 1 play. I expected there to be a preponderance of novels and literary text, especially given the fact, and as somebody who works on the Caribbean intellectual tradition, the Caribbean intellectual tradition is not taught in a systematic way in schools or often at the university, even at the University of the West Indies in some cases. So I'm not actually absolutely surprised that there was less of this, especially when I think that many of the great Caribbean social and political thinkers, their work is expressed mainly through the essay, the speech, rather than the single scholarly tome in terms of the single offered scholarly tome. Having said that, there were some omissions that caused me to raise my eyebrows slightly. I was a little surprised that M.A. Césaire's Discourse on Colonialism was not there. I was also surprised that George Lamming's The Pleasures of Exile was also absent from the list, since that is a book that really announced something about the diasporic condition. And I thought that that would be a book that more persons may have engaged with. And then, of course, there were texts that I'm not surprised were not there, even despite their decisive importance, because I think about the question of circulation and the way that nonfiction texts actually circulate within the region. And here I'm thinking about things like the very great Haitian anthropologist John Price Mars and his Thus Spoke the Uncle, which was there. Or I'm thinking also of Elsa Gavaya and the fact that none of her work were there. But Elsa Gavaya's work I do not think is regularly available in print. Yes, Yes, I think that there is a question about the intellectual tradition of the region, the social and political thinkers, the way in which they are present on the list. But I think that there are also some explanations for it that we can very quickly advance in terms of understanding why those omissions are there and what this tells us about how Caribbean thought is received and interpreted by persons in the region.
Johnny, I think this is a great time to get your perspective as a publisher, someone wearing that hat. You know, there are some concerns raised about circulation. I mean, that's a conversation, an ongoing conversation. Tell us from where you sit, what does the list tell you?
One of the things, well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having me. I'm deeply honored to be part of this conversation. I was born and raised in Washington, D.C. I'm not from the Caribbean, and I'm honored to publish the books that I do, and I'm thrilled to have been invited to participate in this. And one of the things that I noticed when looking at the list, and this is something that has always occurred to me about literature from the region, is it's such a diverse region on various levels, whether we're talking about religion, ethnicity, race, also literary style. But I wonder, and this is something, you know, I'd be curious to hear what others have to say, is when something becomes so diverse, is there, you know, what is it? And I'm looking at it from the outside. So what does it mean, Caribbean literature? What does that even mean? Because there's so many different types of writers and so many incredible books coming from the region. And I also want to note that both Olive and Aaron have commented upon, you know, being taught this literature. Of course, I was not taught any of these books until I was at university, and I happened, and this is in the mid-1980s, I went to Wesleyan University in Middletown, Connecticut, and I was very fortunate to be at a school where a woman named Hazel Carby was teaching a couple of courses on Caribbean literature. I had become interested in reggae music, and I loved books, and so I signed up for her courses, and that's where these are two of the actual editions of the books that I was taught, and so it's been an incredible to read the explosion of literature coming out of the region since maybe 2000, as Olive was saying, because I think back when Hazel Carby was putting her course list together, she had a much more limited list of what to include on it. But even in those courses, when I was a university student, I still struggled with this question of what is the Caribbean identity? Because I live in New York City, which is, you know, one of the most diverse cities in the, I live in Brooklyn specifically, and people will often ask me, because I'm very involved in Brooklyn literary endeavors, you know, what does it mean to be a Brooklyn writer? And I never know how to answer that, because it depends on which writer you're talking to. And so that, for me, that is a question that is always hovering around. And I'm proud to be a publisher of Caribbean literature, but I'd be hard pressed to say what is at the heart of Caribbean literature. My only thing is I know a good book when I read it.
And maybe that's the most important thing, right? But for the purposes of this discussion, is it clear to you, to any of you or all of you, that it is possible to come up with a Caribbean literary canon? Not suggesting that what this list presents is that, you know, we've made it quite clear that this is not a definitive list of, by any means, of the top 100 Caribbean books. These are just the books that we know people feel are the ones that have influenced them or shaped who they are today. So do you think it's possible to come up with that kind of literary canon based perhaps on some of the things Johnny has said?
I don't really know. I don't even know if it's necessary, because it's not just that the society is so diverse, as Johnny said, in terms geographically, in terms of languages and so on. But now there is also the diaspora, you know, and the question arises, how do people define themselves? Who is a Caribbean writer? To me, I leave it up to the person to say what they are. And quite frankly, it's not an important question to me. You know, I think these things evolve and happen and occur. I'm not into sort of trying to impose any sort of rules or laws, but maybe Aaron, who is the academic, might see differently.
Well, I mean, my sense here also is that we should resist canonization. And one of the reasons that we should resist it is that there are so many fascinating ways in which we can teach a course on Caribbean literature or even 20th century Caribbean literature. And different ways of teaching it will reveal to us different things and often sometimes more compelling things. So let's say if we were teaching a course on post-World War II Caribbean literature, and we say explicitly, we're not going to have any work by Laming, Selvon, Naipaul, or Wilson Harris on it, okay? What would that allow us to see if we're to actually construct a course outline and construct a course doing that? What would it actually, I mean, sometimes when we canonize, then we believe that there are certain things that we cannot not have. And I think that we should resist that temptation because Caribbean literature has become so wide and vast and deep over the years that I think that there are many different themes, there are many different subplots in telling the story. Some literary critics, for example, have revealed to us in the last 10 years that we've missed a lot of the post-Windrush generation because for a long period of time, we thought that the work produced in the 50s onwards was the work, I'm talking about just narrowly for a moment in the Anglophone context, we thought that that was the work that really announced the Caribbean to the world. Now, when we're looking back with different eyes at some of the previous work, we can see that while it wasn't anti-colonial or nationalist in some ways, it had some fascinatingly important and ambivalent things to say about Caribbean society that we're only now starting to uncover. So in my field, for example, I write mainly on Caribbean social and political thought, and there is a similar conundrum that we are experiencing now in terms of the fact that, yes, there's been a lot of great work on the anti-colonial writers, C.L.R. James, the M.A. Césaire, the Frantz Fanon, and very deservedly so. But when we go back to the 19th century, that is really the open field of interrogation in Caribbean social and political thought. And you're going to get figures who are far more ambivalent about their relationship to the colonial empire. But in looking at some of this work, and some of this work is actually quite conservative, so much so that we can actually think of a tradition of Caribbean conservative thought, rather than always talking about Caribbean radical tradition. Some of this conservative work is fascinating in its own right. And it's fascinating because it reveals something about the ways not only in which Caribbean people were dealing with and trying to navigate their route through coloniality in the 19th century, but also the ways in which people tend to deal with the realities of neocolonialism, neoliberalism, and coloniality in this present day, because most of us do not actually advance or wish radical solutions of our societies, for our societies. We know that there's something very wrong with what is happening, but that doesn't necessarily mean we want a radical solution.
You know, I find it interesting you talked about the 19th century or the absence of 19th century work. And it's interesting that in one of the BBC's lists, I don't think it was the 100 novels that shaped us, but people in response, non-Caribbean people, observed that there was almost a complete absence of 19th century work from their list also. And so, of course, you know, when you do these lists, by no means will it satisfy everyone. You're definitely going to make a lot of people unhappy. It will always be incomplete. But there is certainly, in this list that we came up with, there is an emphasis, a very heavy emphasis on like mid to late or to mid-late 20th century literature, writing, especially that post-colonial tradition. But you don't really get too much. All of you said you divided the list into two, you know, pre-2000 and post-2000. And, you know, that is something that is stark in the list. When you look at the titles, you look at the authors, you look at the dates of publication, it's stark that the education system does have a lot to do with shaping how we read and how we access books. And Johnny, that's something I'd really like for you to talk about. You know, as a publisher, do you think that, you know, that is really part of the challenge, how people are accessing books?
Absolutely. And book distribution is always challenging, and that's been in terms of here in the United States, it's been very helpful when, for example, Marlon James won the Booker Prize, and it really sort of opened the doors not just for people who read the New York Times Book Review, but book distribution. And there's so many books published every day that even a bookstore is something that's carefully curated. I used to think a bookstore was a place where you could buy any book, but it's not true at all in any bookstore anywhere. And it's impossible for booksellers, bookstores to carry everything. And so it becomes, curate, everything is curated. And that's, in some ways, it sounds like I'm complaining, but the fact is that more voices and more writers are being published than ever before, and that's a good thing. So the fact that publishing is more accessible to writers and to the general public, is overall a very good thing. But what it does is it clogs everything up, and I wouldn't have it any other way, because literature used to be the domain of just the rich, basically, the upper class, the upper middle class, and the upper class, and it remains that way as a business. As a business, it absolutely remains that way, and it's shockingly undiverse in the United States. But on the other hand, the playing field is slowly getting leveled. But for any book to be sort of distributed and get itself out there is a big challenge. And so if you're talking about writers who are actually like living in the Caribbean, it's going to be very, very hard to get a book published to begin with, and then well distributed. Then there's the issue of, for us here in New York, getting books that we publish, exporting them into the Caribbean, because we are the originating publisher for some Caribbean books. And the only way for a Trinidadian bookseller, or a Jamaican bookseller or anyone to get them is from us and from our distribution. And there's all sorts of economic factors, largely economic factors, conspiring against the free flowing of books between countries. So the distribution of books and the promotion of books is a constant challenge. But again, I don't want to sound like I'm complaining. I love what I do. I'm honored to do what I do, and I'm up for the challenge. But it's never not going to be a challenge.
I'm wondering if, well, in your case, Olive, you're usually in Canada, and for you, Johnny, do you get a sense that the Caribbean diaspora, would perhaps expect to see more contemporary titles on such a list?
I don't quite follow the.
So we did know that there's an absence of many contemporary titles, that most of the publication dates are pre-2000 even. I'm wondering if the diaspora, the Caribbean diaspora, in terms of their exposure to more contemporary Caribbean writing, do you have a sense that this list would perhaps sit differently with them than maybe people resident in the Caribbean who've grown up reading Miguel Street, for instance, Sam Selvin? These are like household names in the region. But I'm wondering if it's the same for folks who've grown up in the diaspora out in Canada, in the US, etc.
Yeah, I think it would be different. Yeah, because as we know, as we've said, the list is heavily educational. It's based on our education in the Caribbean. And that also has to do with how the access to books. Most of the early publishers, or virtually all of them, were educational publishers. And the books got here along a certain route. They were put on book lists, of course, they were taught and so on. And that is what determined people's reading up to a certain point in time. Now I think it is very different. I like to feel that we are in a completely new age now, in terms of how books get published, but also how people access them, and more than anything else, how people determine what they want to read. I don't think that the Caribbean or the diaspora we're shaped any longer by what our teachers tell us to read, because we can go out there and find out for ourselves. This is what, the modern age has done for us. And there are endless bloggers, book clubs. There's a whole set of young people out there who are really on the ball in identifying all the hot new books that they want to read, no matter where they are in the world. They're talking about them. They're trying to get them distributed, whether virtually or, through actual books and so on. So I think the whole playing field has changed in terms of how books are available, how they're accessed. And that in the future will determine a very different type of list. It will be more a list that's more a reflection of people's own thoughts and desires and thinking about our society than the list in the past. And I'm not denigrating what we have. We've all learned from it. I'm just saying that in a way, our thinking and our choices have been channeled by educational systems. Whereas in the future, people are going to make choices about reading independently or in discussion with others like themselves. So book bloggers, book clubs, and so on are going to matter a great deal more than, I think, the school system.
Olive, tell us, what are some of the books that you think are missing? Aaron gave us a few of his.
Well, I don't even want to go into the fiction or poetry. I mean, I could add a lot of books there. What I'm concerned about is the books that deal with. It just seems to me that there's been so much research, so many books have come out in the post-independence period that are enabling us as Caribbean citizens to look at our societies in different ways. So these are books in economics or politics, they're in cultural studies, they're feminist studies. Very little of that is reflected in this list. Very little about the fact that Caribbean cultures have been changed so much through music, through new religions. There have been all these social movements that have transformed us. And I do not feel that those books are reflected in the list. And for instance, I personally can tell you the book that has transformed me more than any other book, and that is the Dictionary of Jamaican English. When that book came out, suddenly it validated for me so much about my own culture that I had grown up with, that had been denigrated, the language of ordinary people. And suddenly we were being told, hey, this is important. This is such a significant part of our culture. And so many books have been written, so much research has been done since then about, for instance, language, linguistics, that kind of transformation. So I guess I'm reflecting my own biases here.
Always, that's what we do, right?
Those are the things that have shaped me, and it's not really fiction or even poetry. To me, it's nonfiction for me, hence my disappointment. But as I say, I'm not disappointed with what is there. It's fairly standard, it's expected. Some things are missing, yes, but I'll just mention one set of books though that I would love to have seen here. There's nothing here about dub poetry or language poetry. I would have liked to have seen a Linton Kwesi Johnson or a Muta Baruko or Louise Bennett here, because again, this is a part of our society that has been totally transformed in the last, 50, 60 years. And so I'm looking at the list in terms of what shaped us. And I feel some of that is missing.
Thank you for that. So is it that the list is telling us more about the people who responded to the call than anything else then? It sounds like it. it sounds like we could come up with perhaps a certain demographic of people who answered the question we asked. Aaron,
Yes.
you had some thoughts on that?
Oh, certainly. And also on the earlier point made by Olive, very, very well. Now, I think that the absence of dub poetry there is fascinating. I think, though, also there is something to say about translation and the way that texts circulate through the Caribbean in terms of the fact that they are 8 Francophone texts, 2 Hispanophone texts, and all of the rest are Anglophone texts, okay? So in terms of Hispanophone texts, there is nothing there by Nicolas Guillen, you know, which is kind of amazing, even though there are 15 poetry collections there, but nothing by Guillen. Similarly, I mean, there are, of course, also certain specific things, like there are 3 texts by Jamaican Kincaid, but I was kind of surprised that Autobiography of My Mother wasn't one of them, because Autobiography of My Mother, I think, is widely considered to be Jamaican Kincaid's masterpiece, and so I was a little surprised there. But then I would have to look quickly at the list again, perhaps, but I think there was a somewhat absence of short story collections there. And I wonder about that too, because I would have think that things like the Penguin set of Caribbean short stories, also the Oxford collection edited by Wickham and Stuart Brown, would have been also influential in a particular manner. And I speak subject to correction, but I don't recall seeing them there. The other thing I would like to talk about, though, with respect to representation, has to do with the interesting change that I suspected was in place, and I think the numbers bear me out, post-1980. Now, there are 56 books which were published since 1980. I may be 1 or 2 wrong on that, because I'm thinking about books that saw their first publication post-1980. So in my quick count through, I may have gotten 1 or 2 of them wrong. But of them, 33 were by Caribbean women. And I think that this is very significant, because I think that what we see in the decades of the 1980s is an eruption onto the literary scene of the voices of Caribbean women. There's so many great Caribbean writers whose first or most significant work, they announced themselves to the scene in the 1980s. So I'm thinking about Erna Broadbur, Jamaica Kincaid, Dion Brand, Olive Sr., Merle Collins, Michelle Cliff, Lorna Goodison, Marlene or Bessie Phillip, Grace Nichols, Ziegel, all of whom I think are on the list. And I think that transformation within Caribbean literature is certainly something to be announced and to be understood. Certainly there were many Caribbean women who had written books before, but that decade shift announces something completely new and transforms the Caribbean literary scene. And I'm glad that we see it reflected in the choice of titles, in terms of when you actually do the numbers and you divide it by years and decades and periods, it's very clear that people understand that Caribbean women writers are now dominant on the scene of Caribbean literature and dominantly influential over the last 40 years since 1980.
Thank you for pointing that out, because I think one of the observations made with various statistics, for instance, when we did the top 24 most mentioned books last year, there were just a few women, Olive being one of them, who emerged in those 24 titles. And the same when we look at the authors who have 2 or more books on the list, there are 19 of those. And I believe just about 5 or 6 of them are women on that list, of course, including Olive. And I just want to say that Olive is actually the only person on the list who has books that register across all 3 main genres, fiction, poetry, and nonfiction. And I think that is also significant. And the reason I mentioned this is because it was clear to us that the men who dominate across the board, who have the most titles on the list, are the ones we expect: the Derek Walcott, the V.S. Naipaul, C.L.R. James, Earl Lovelace, and Sam Selvon as well. And that was not surprising, but it was reassuring to see the number of titles by women after 1980. So thank you for bringing that out, Aaron. Johnny, are there any specific observations you have with respect to what was not there?
As a non-Caribbean person, I'm hesitant to venture my opinion, but
no, that's why you're here, Johnny. Please tell us.
To me, the most glaring omission is Kwame Dawes. most notably his poetry. I've been fortunate to publish a couple of his novels and one of his books of poetry, but I consider him to be, a larger than life figure in Caribbean literature. And I will also say that the caveat being that as a publisher, I of course notice my own books, and one of them is Anthony Winkler's.
Yes.
Which to me, I would think would be on this list. There is an Anthony Winkler book on the list.
It is, yes.
I think it's his memoir. But another, and this goes to one of the points that Aaron was making. Something that's definitely missing from the list is this Haitian novel, René Depestre's Hadriana and All My Dreams. That's, of course, the English translation of his French title. This English language edition was translated by Kayama Glover beautifully. And as I understand it, this is an extremely important book in Haiti, and presumably reflective, again, of what we're saying of who drew up this list. And just the final point that if you were to make the 100, the books that made us for American readers, or perhaps Canadian readers as well, non-Caribbean people, there would be no books before 1980, like none, like nobody. Very, very, very few people in America know who Sam Selvin is, for example. In fact, I think The Lonely Londoners is not in print in the United States. About 8 years ago, I made an attempt to get the rights to publish it in the United States, because it's just not to be found, and I was not able to get those rights. And I think maybe now that my company is a little bit older and more established, it's time for me to go back and reach back out to the estate, because it's a literary crime that The Lonely Londoners is not available. Of course, there's a chance that I'm wrong and it's been reissued without me knowing it, but there's a lot of those books of the 100 books on the current list that we're talking about that are not in print in the United States.
I could say about Selvin that, he lived in Canada, and yet he's practically unknown there. So, yeah.
Yeah, so that makes the point.
It's making honest, yes.
Yeah, definitely.
That is his books are, Lonely Londoner is a classic. And here is this man, writing these books, living, I think he was like a postman, working as a postman in Canada. Canadians do not know about him. His books, I don't know if his books are available there. So, I mean, that's another point about the diaspora, and who gets published, who gets noticed, etc., which is probably a totally different argument.
One of the things I was interested to find out from you all is whether you feel there are books on that list, whether or not they're in the majority, but are there enough books on that list, you think, to respond to today's current affairs, the reality of, whether it's Black Lives Matter and how that has sort of the ripple effect that has had in the region, the conversations that are happening, the fact that there's so many young people I have been seeing and hearing online in particular, discovering new voices that are indeed quite old, but unknown hitherto. So for instance, you see the emergence of James Baldwin in the US as this huge revolutionary literary figure. And while we would have known him, certainly there was never any attention paid to his work in the way that it is now. And I'm wondering if there are books on the current list of 100 that you feel could do that for Caribbean people, given our context and our realities.
I would say, if I could come in here quickly, that's certainly the work of C.L.R. James and Frantz Fanon, who are the two greatest Caribbean political theorists of the 20th century, has great relevance at our time and in many different times. But I think this actually goes back to the very discerning point that Olive made previously about the absence of a lot of the work that has been done in cultural studies, in feminist studies, on the economy, and other of this kind of work, we're seeing an absence of that particular nonfiction work in the list. And this is a work that actually could inform this moment very much. So that perhaps is one of the interesting questions and one of the interesting conundrums that you are actually seeing there. But I do think that some of the nonfiction work there, and of course the fiction work, can certainly inform this particular type of moment, because many of these questions are not questions which are occurring for the first time. It is the cycles of coloniality perpetuating themselves over and over in the region and throughout the world. And I think that Fanon's very famous comment about each generation having to discover their mission and either fulfill it or betray it certainly becomes true here. And it also becomes true in terms of each generation's reading practices and the knowledge of a Caribbean that they are going to discover. That is they're either going to receive it through these books, they're going to perhaps find that some of these books are limited and they're going to go to other sources, but hopefully it will all emerge towards a purpose. And that purpose, of course, is a purpose of Caribbean freedom beyond coloniality.
It's all, I think, I mean, we in the Caribbean have very short memories. I think we lack a sense of history of that kind of depth. And so we keep reinventing things over and over. And therefore, the lack of knowledge about certain things that have already been discussed in the past is a reflection of that. It's not just about books, it's about everything. And we keep on reinventing, rehashing ideas and so on because of a lack of knowledge. And I think we need to find new ways of educating the young, maybe not saying to them, go and read Persistent Poverty, but meeting them on their meeting ground. And maybe we should be creating what in my days was known as comic books. Now it's, what is it, Johnny?
Graphic novels?
No, graphic novels, sorry, yeah. Maybe, we need to find ways of meeting people halfway in terms of transmitting this serious and important information. It's different if you're reading a novel than if you're encouraging people to read something heavier in economics or politics or so on. But I don't think we've done a very good job of disseminating the information that's contained in those books. In the same way, we have done a very poor job of telling the young about the people who have gone before and who have contributed to society, not just in writing books, but in so many other ways. So I think this list, in a way, is maybe pointing us to what we need to do in the future to engage people more in this literary and intellectual exercise.
Johnny, you're in an interesting position, I think, in the diaspora. I think I've also seen in the last year with George Floyd and everything that has happened since, and the politics of the United States, we've seen the resurgence of some Caribbean authors as well. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on how people are accessing that kind of information through Caribbean books, if you've noticed any uptick in interest there?
I've noticed there's an uptick in general in interest in books by Black authors. And I'm hoping it's not, a trend, a passing trend, which sort of is what we can expect it to be, sadly. And I'm hoping it's not. And I also will say that there's this tone around that dynamic of it being like, these are the books you should be reading, like it's homework or an obligation, which is missing the point. Like, people should read great books, and they just need to understand, broaden their mind about what makes a great book. It's very frustrating, of course, you know, in the United States publishing, there's this, you know, it's like publishers are berating themselves, and it just has this feeling of obligation rather than let's talk about great art, you know, and ideas and thought, and let's debate and discuss, and let's do it enthusiastically and wholeheartedly, not out of some sense of guilt. But on the other hand, there's nothing to complain about if people are reading more books in more books by Black authors. So there's a real opportunity right now, and I like I said, I just hope that it's not a passing trend, because that would be a little depressing.
Okay, so let's switch it up a little bit. I think at least two of you mentioned the role of prizes in perhaps shaping how people have come to access some of the books on the list. And I want to get your thoughts on that. If you think that there's a lot more that could be done to bring attention to contemporary work beyond prizes, and how could that be done? And maybe, Johnny, I can start with you by asking you, is it more attractive to you to publish an author who has already won a prize?
Only if their book is great. I mean, if someone's won a Booker or a Nobel Prize, that's attractive. But other than the very, very top level, you know, every time you publish a book, you just do not know what's going to happen unless it's someone like Stephen King, who always sells 5 million copies. But other than that, every time you publish a book, you know, you got to get out there and sell it and expose people to it and work really, really hard. So, you know, if someone's won a prize, you know, a notable prize like the Bocas Prize, it's certainly something that's going to catch my attention or catch other editors' attention. But really, what it comes down to is just the book itself. And so I'm not overly influenced by prize winners.
What are your thoughts on the role of prizes, Aaron and Olive, for Caribbean books?
I mean, I'm not certain how much the prizes actually expand the reading public. I'm not certain about my answer to that. What I think I am a little more convinced that is the role of festivals and the role of book fairs. So, I mean, the immense stuff that Bocas has been doing in terms of the Bocas Festival, I think has had a tremendous impact. I certainly think, I'm forgetting in Jamaica, Calabash, yes, sorry. Calabash, the role of Calabash, the role of a St. Martin Book Fair, which I haven't managed to get to yet. I certainly think that the famous one in Havana also, I certainly think that those kind of book fairs and those kind of literary events have immense ability to bring in a reading public, because look at the range of things that actually take place there. Even people who may think that they are not readers will be drawn in to the event because there is an expansion of their knowledge and comprehension of what an engagement with the literary actually means. So I think that those are the events that certainly should be supported to the very hilt by the governments, by the private sector, by people who are interested in the creative imagination within the Caribbean, and we need more of them, and we need them more regularly rather than less. So that is what I would say, but I don't know how the shortlisting or long listing for the prizes actually affects the sale of books or the expansion in the reading public. In other words, I don't know if that Austin Clarke's winning of the Casa de las Americas Prize for Growing Up Stupid Under the Union Jack, I'm not sure how that affected the circulation of his book within the region, except that I believe that Casa, it once did, I'm not sure if they still do, they make a commitment to translating the book into Spanish, and they give out hundreds of copies of the book. So in that case, I guess, yes, for prizes that have that specific link to publishing and transmission of the book. But I am not sure how that works in the Anglophone Caribbean in terms of the direct relationship between prizes and the reading public.
But thank you anyway for that plug. I think our sponsors would definitely, it would go a long way with them for them to be reminded how important their support is for this work also. Olive, you had a few thoughts to share on that?
Yeah, well, I agree with Aaron about the importance of festivals and these kinds of events, book bloggers, all of that. I would just say in terms of prizes that I think nowadays prizes matter a great deal. It's not so much a prize, it is the way publishers now, it's a publicity that surrounds the prize and even the author. I mean, it's a whole world out there where I understand what Johnny is saying, that it should be about the book and the quality of the book, but we're seeing a lot where that's not the case. It's about the hype surrounding the book. That is what sells books. So we're in a marketplace, folks, and that's important. I would just say my first book, Summer Lightning, won the first Commonwealth Writers Prize, which made a big difference. There wasn't that kind of hype. It wasn't even mentioned in the Daily Gleaner in Jamaica when I won. So, but I think it brought attention to the book on the part of a lot of other people out there who had never heard of it. And so it mattered, I think, in the case of that book, it mattered a great deal. The Pain Tree, which won, and I might add, Summer Lightning has never gone out of print, My book, which won the Bocas, The Pain Tree, that hasn't been really reflected in sales. It's a Canadian publisher, and I now have a British publisher as well, but it never had the same kind of attention outside of, Bocas that other books have had. And therefore, it matters, yes, to the author to say you won a prize. It matters. But the bottom line is in the sales, and the sales depend not so much on the prize, but on the apparatus surrounding the prize and how much your publisher, your agent, and all the people who are in publishing how they're going to get behind that book. And that, I think, is what is important.
I want to talk about the language barrier. We have just over 5 minutes left for this conversation. Time just flew by very quickly. But what are our observations of the issues? I think, Aaron, you broke down the distribution of titles across Francophone, Hispanophone region. And what does it say about how we're reading nowadays? Does it say as much as how we're reading now in terms of access to books across the Caribbean, across language barriers, or does it say something more?
There's one thing it says. I mean, there's a real economic issue, which is that for publishers to publish books in translation, it's hard enough to break even or make money publishing any book. But if you add in the $7,000 US dollars to get a good translation of the book, it's nearly impossible for publishers to make money without some sort of government or assistance or cultural organization assisting. In a lot of European countries, France, Germany, a lot of these countries, that there's government agencies that will reach out to American publishers, British publishers, also publishers in Spain and other territories to support the translation of works. I know in the United States publishers are constantly trying to get our books published into other languages, and we don't reciprocate very well. At Akashic, I think we do better than most publishers, but there's a real imbalance between books that are translated from English into another language versus books that are translated into English. There's a major imbalance, and that's a problem on various levels. But as a book publisher, I understand the economic challenges. We simply can't afford to do much translation without some sort of grant or some sort of assistance. And so I think that when we look at the list of 100 books on this list, we can say, oh, the people reading it are not broad-minded enough, but the people reading it are just not exposed to enough books written by Francophone and Spanish language Caribbean authors. It's just much more limited. Cuba alone is a treasure trove of phenomenal literature, but we've only read a few of those books.
And is there a role for the school system here, Aaron and Olive?
Olive, go.
I'm not quite sure. What do you mean? I mean,
no, in terms of bringing some of those works, the works that are translated, for instance, in terms of bringing those forward.
I guess, but I can't speak for the school system because I think it's, you know, oriented differently. The whole thinking behind education is different. It's not something I'm familiar with. Of course, I think schools can do a lot more, but it's not for me to say how, you know, or what. So I don't really know.
Okay, that's fine. Aaron?
I would say yes. I think that the schools could do more, but you know, there's a fascinating thing that happens in which a lot of the English teachers at schools who are teaching books are more familiar with, and they tend to teach books that they actually did when they were doing their undergraduate degree at university, okay? So I would love actually to do a study of the books that have been used in, let's say, the history text or the literature text in a number of Anglophone Caribbean countries over about the last 40 years, and what transformation has taken place or what transformation has actually not taken place. Because I would hazard a guess that there is a significant time lag, okay, perhaps decades-long time lag between the books that become interesting or important or fashionable in the literary scene and on these various kinds of like book shows, etc., and what is actually being taught in the classroom. So I suspect that's happening, which is a shame because yes, I think there are a lot of people in the Caribbean who post-school don't actually read that many literary texts. And I think that the books that they read at school really do actually have a great resonance with them. I mean, I have friends who are professionals, who are doctors and engineers, and I get the impression that in the last 20 or 30 years since they left school, they have read less than 10 literary Caribbean novels or texts. But they will go back, and when we talk about issues around this, they say, yeah, that reminds me of when I read The Wine of Astonishment at school. They will actually go back to these texts, and you see how formative they are in a particular manner to how they actually think about the world. Those texts they read when they were about 13 to 16. We may not consider this ideal, but it's a real thing. So I think the schools are immensely important, and someone has to do the work and the interests of having that discussion with them about different directions they can go in.
Okay, so I only have time for one more thing. And because Olive has already pointed out, she mentioned one book that has shaped her, and I know there are quite a few. I'll ask Aaron and Johnny for you two to tell us from the list, if there are any on the list. If not, what are the Caribbean books that have shaped you?
Johnny?
I will say one book that's not on the list that has really shaped me is Marlon James's debut novel, which I published, and when I was fortunate to be invited to speak at in around 2004 maybe at a workshop in Kingston hosted by Calabash, and there I met Marlon James, who was an unpublished writer who had basically just abandoned the idea of becoming a writer because he was too frustrated at having been rejected too many times. And the process of meeting Marlon and then reading his manuscript, loving it fully and instantly, and then helping to sort of introduce him to a writer, or to a wider audience, influenced his life. And also opened up a lot of doors for me, in particular with Caribbean writers, and so it really, that book really helped to make me in terms of as a book publisher, and it's sort of my dream come true. It's much more exciting to meet an author in person in Kingston than it is to meet an author via an email attachment from a literary agent in New York.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Johnny.
And for myself, I would just say quickly, I mean, you're asking the impossible for me to choose.
I know, just choose one, right? Just one Aaron.
Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth. Okay? And that has to do with my own social and political thinking, but the enormous critique of colonialism and the pathway towards a new society beyond coloniality, the critique of neocolonialism, and that it is still the greatest single text, social and political text published by a Caribbean writer in the 20th century, and it is the most important text of the anti-colonial movement of the 1960s. That's so Frantz Fanon, The Wretched of the Earth.
Brilliant. You all have been a wonderful panel. Thank you so much. I know there's a lot more discussion to come on this, and in fact, Bocas has a few scheduled for the rest of this year, because we are going to keep this conversation going. There's so many other things to, I think, dissect from this list. And again, we encourage you to go to the bocaslitfest.com website, where you will find the list in its entirety, and you can, send us your comments, engage the Bocas team on your thoughts of the list. So thank you so much for staying tuned to our closing panel. Thank you for staying tuned to us over this wonderful, glorious weekend of the NGC Bocas Lit Fest. Have a good evening.
And so, sadly, we've come to the end of the 2021 NGC Bocas Lit Fest. It's been a wonderful few days, and I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we've enjoyed doing it for you. I want to say huge thanks to everybody working behind the scenes who made it possible. Huge thanks to our writers, and all of you have been really active on social media. We're going to be with you on social media and digitally and virtually all during the course of the year. It may be the end of the festival, but it's not the end of 2021, not for us. There'll be at least one event happening every single week, right up until December. So thanks again, and I couldn't leave this year without saying huge thanks to our sponsors, especially our title sponsor, the National Gas Company. Without them and without all of our sponsors, it would not be possible to do anything. So thank you for staying with us, and please stay with us. And if any of you want to be sponsors of the Bocas Lit Fest, please check us on the website, and have a lovely time. And we'll be here again next year, maybe not virtual.